When a gravely wounded Navy SEAL is rushed into a civilian hospital with no surgeon available, young nurse Emily Hart makes a fateful decision. Defy protocol and attempt the impossible. In 40 adrenaline-charged minutes, she saves his life. But instead of praise, she's fired. Cast out by the institution she served, Emily faces public silence and private doubt. Alone, exhausted, betrayed, yet something far larger is unfolding. Because the moment she dared to act, it set in motion a chain of events that would shake institutions, attract the military's attention, and challenge everything America thinks it knows about courage. And it's only begun. If Emily's story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Help us spotlight untold acts of everyday courage and honor the quiet heroes among us. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive and reminds the world that bravery doesn't always wear a uniform. The trauma bay lights flickered overhead as the doors burst open with a force that made everyone freeze. Blood, chaos, and then a deafening silence. "If you hesitate, he's dead," snapped one of the escorts, his voice as sharp and cold as a scalpel. A young nurse, no surgeon on call, no orders, just her and the brutal weight of a decision. Emily Hart, only 23 and 6 months into her trauma unit rotation, stood there trembling inside but steady on the outside. It was the middle of the night, and the hospital felt different, quieter, sacred. The soft whir of machines and the rhythmic beeping of monitors were oddly comforting, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. Emily had always found solace in that quiet. She was younger than most of her team, her brown hair pulled back in a tight bun that had started to unravel. Loose strands clung to her damp forehead, framing eyes that were rimmed with fatigue. But inside, behind that exhaustion, something burned, a quiet, unwavering resolve. Emily had grown up with stories of courage that weren't splashed across headlines. Her grandfather, a decorated World War II veteran, had raised her with tales of honor in the small, invisible moments. A soldier sharing his last piece of bread, a medic staying behind under enemy fire. From him, she had learned, you don't wait for someone to tell you what's right. You do it, always. That belief had carried her through nursing school, through grueling night shifts, and now through every long, blood-soaked evening at St. Raymond's Medical Center. She had made it her mission to live up to that legacy, no matter how quietly it was carried. The night everything changed had started like any other. Patients with broken bones, heart attacks, overdoses. Emily moved quickly, efficiently, her touch calm and reassuring, her small frame working harder than most expected. But something about that night felt wrong. A pressure in the air, a strange stillness, a flicker in the hallway lights that seemed to linger too long. Then the trauma pager screamed its shrill alarm. Code red, critical trauma, unidentified male, multiple GSWs, ETA 4 minutes. Emily's eyes met the charge nurses. No words needed. Gloves snapped on, carts rolled into place. The trauma bay, silent just moments before, erupted into a controlled chaos. Emily moved without thinking, laying out grease, suction, clamps, every motion rehearsed. But beneath the routine, something gnawed at her. No ambulance, unidentified, multiple gunshot wounds. What the hell was coming through those doors? The screech of tires answered her. Not an ambulance, but a black SUV, government-grade, darkened windows. It tore into the ambulance bay like a beast. The doors slammed open. 2 men in tactical gear stormed out, dragging a third between them. At first, he looked like dead weight, a mass of blood and torn uniform. His head lolled to one side, his body limp. For a second, Emily thought he was already gone. "We need a surgeon now!" The taller soldier bellowed as they rushed inside. But no one came. A massive pileup on the other side of town had stranded the trauma surgeon. The room froze. Nurses, orderlies, staff, all waiting for someone, anyone to take charge. But no one moved, except Emily. She stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "What happened?" "Ambush," the soldier growled. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow. 40 rounds. He's our asset. If he dies, Washington answers for it. Emily's heart slammed in her chest. 40 bullets. The man's breathing was shallow, his pulse faint and erratic beneath her fingertips, like the wings of a dying bird. She glanced around the room, the wide-eyed team, the paralyzed staff. the empty doorway where the surgeon should be. And she knew. It was her. Only her. No orders were coming. No backup. Just her hands and the life slowly slipping away in front of her. She moved fast. Her training kicked in, not as something remembered, but something lived. She worked through the blood and the torn muscle and the shattered flesh, one bullet at a time, fighting to pull the Navy SEAL back from the edge. Hour after hour she worked, drenched in sweat, her hands trembling, but precise. By the time the sun rose, she was exhausted. But he was alive, and she thought that would be enough. It wasn't. By the next shift, she was fired. No medal, no handshake, just a cold dismissal. Emily Hart had made a choice. She had done what was right. She had saved a life. And for that, she was cast out. What followed would shake the country. But it all started here. Emily Hart had always been taught that protocol was sacred. Rules were written in stone for a reason. But when the voice cut through the chaos, if you hesitate, he's dead, something inside her snapped into place. Training, legality, liability, all of it faded into the background. There was only one truth she could hear. A man was dying, and no one else was going to save him. "Prep for field surgery," she commanded, her voice sharper and more decisive than she had ever heard it. "Suction, clamps, irrigation. We're going in." "You're not cleared," the charge nurse gasped, alarm flickering across her face. "If we wait, he dies," Emily shot back, already moving. The room stalled for a heartbeat, and then surged into action like a machine shifting into gear. They lifted the SEAL onto the trauma table. Emily's hands, impossibly steady, sliced through the blood-drenched tactical gear. The injuries beneath were catastrophic, gaping entry and exit wounds, muscle torn apart, blood vessels pulsing wildly, begging for help. She didn't panic. She prioritized. The worst injury, a bullet lodged deep in his shoulder, barely missing an artery. Suction, irrigate, extract, clamp, pack, move on. She spoke with a rhythm that pulled the team into sync. A young doctor took over suction. A tech passed her instruments instinctively. The trauma bay morphed into a makeshift operating theater, and at its center, Emily led, not with rank, but with sheer will. Time warped. Minutes became a blur of wet suction, metallic clatters, the insistent beeping of monitors. The patient flatlined once, twice. Emily shocked him back both times, paddles pressing down hard, adrenaline burning in her veins. 3 bullets came out, then 5, 12 in total. Each one a hard-earned victory. Her scrubs were soaked. Blood streaked her cheeks, sweat stung her eyes. But her focus didn't break. Not once. She didn't allow it. 40 minutes passed before she finally stepped back. The tray beside her was filled with spent bullets, no longer threats tearing through flesh. His breathing now was strong, steady. He was alive. She backed away, legs shaky, hands trembling. She was drained, beyond exhaustion, her body running on the last fumes of adrenaline. Around her, the team stared in silence, stunned. One nurse openly sobbed. The SEAL had survived. But Emily's night was far from over. She peeled off her gloves, heart still thundering in her chest. The adrenaline began to crash, and with it came the weight of what she'd done. No orders, no clearance, only instinct, and a decision she couldn't take back. She had saved a life, but at what cost? The trauma bay, once an epicenter of urgency and noise, was now silent. The man she'd fought for was stabilized, prepped for transfer. His breathing came evenly now, a life pulled back from the brink. Around her, staff moved like shadows, pale faces, downcast eyes. No congratulations, no nods of approval, only quiet. Emily stripped off her gloves, skin tugged by dried blood. Her arms trembled, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what she had just done. She had crossed a line. She knew that. But which line mattered more? The one inked in a manual or the one that separated life from death? She stood in the locker room facing her reflection. Her hair clung to her forehead, soaked. Her face was smeared with sweat and dried blood. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. But deep inside, beyond the fatigue, there burned a quiet, stubborn pride. She had done what no one else had dared to. The moment didn't last. "Nurse Emily Hart, please report to administration immediately." The intercom voice was flat, cold. not the usual friendly tone she was used to. A chill ran down her spine. Her legs moved, but her mind reeled. The hallway felt longer than ever, the posters lining the walls, excellence in care, compassion in action, now felt like bitter irony. Co-workers she'd shared coffee with, laughed with, averted their eyes. A junior nurse who had once confided in her late at night now clutched her clipboard, pretending not to notice. Another whispered something to a colleague as Emily passed, their words buried under the buzz of fluorescent lights. Her pulse pounded. She tried to steady her breath, tried to reclaim the clarity she'd felt just an hour ago. But this was different. This wasn't trauma, it was judgment, and it was colder. She pushed open the glass doors to administration. Inside waited two security guards, a woman from human resources she barely recognized, and Dr. Beckman, the chief of staff. His expression was tight, unreadable. His eyes locked onto hers, and in them there was no warmth. Fixed somewhere over Emily's shoulder, her gaze trying to find grounding in a moment that had none. Beckman's voice broke through, formal and clearly practiced. "Thank you for coming, Emily. Please have a seat." But she didn't sit. Couldn't. He continued, expression carefully neutral. "Given the circumstances of tonight's events, the board has determined we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words crashed over her like a wave of ice water. "Terminate?" Her voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. "I saved his life." Before Beckman could respond, the HR representative cut in, her tone sharp and clinical. "You acted without authorization. This is a civilian hospital. There were no signed consents, no attending surgeon, no legal protection for what you did." Beckman's voice softened slightly, though it felt more like pity than understanding. "We know you believed you were doing the right thing, but your actions have put the hospital in a legally vulnerable position." He pushed an envelope across the table. "1 week's severance. Please return your badge and any hospital property." The guards nearby shifted subtly, bracing themselves, as if they expected her to lash out, to scream, to protest, to fight back, like she was dangerous. Emily's eyes dropped to the envelope, then to the ID badge clipped to her scrubs, her name printed beneath the hospital's crest, now reduced to a meaningless piece of plastic. That badge had been more than an ID. It had represented every overnight shift she'd powered through, every tear shed in stairwells, every miracle, every loss. Now it was nothing more than a funeral token for a career she had poured her soul into. Her fingers trembled as she unclipped it. Quietly, deliberately, she set it on the table. No dramatic exit, no last words. She turned and walked out. The guard's eyes followed her like ghosts. Outside, dawn was just beginning to break. The sky was brushed with soft streaks of pink and orange. Shadows stretched long and thin across the nearly empty parking lot. Emily paused beside her car. The morning chill bit at her skin, but she didn't feel it. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. Behind her, the hospital towered silently, once a place of hope, of healing. Now it felt like a monument to betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "We're so sorry. We know what you did. We're with you." But where were they in that room? Where were their voices when she needed them most? No one had stood up for her. No one had challenged the decision as she was cast out like a liability. The engine hummed as she pulled away from the curb. The city slowly awakened around her. Traffic lights blinking amber, buses roaring to life, joggers tracing familiar routes. No one knew that inside that car, a nurse was returning home defeated. Her apartment was quiet, but not in the comforting way it usually was. It felt stripped of warmth. She sank onto the edge of her bed, still wearing the same scrubs, still stained with the blood and urgency of the night before. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking. The adrenaline had finally left her, and all that remained was bone-deep fatigue and a storm of doubt. She couldn't stop replaying the night, the SUV screeching to a halt, the back doors flying open, the soldier's frantic plea, the Navy SEAL's face, pale and slick with blood, eyes filled with fading consciousness. She had acted. She had done what she had been trained to do, what her heart demanded she do, but those words kept echoing. No authorization, legal risk, termination. Had saving a life really meant she had to lose everything else? Her eyes drifted to the badge now lying on the kitchen counter. That morning, it had given her access to patients, to procedures, to a purpose. Now it looked like an insult. She hadn't done the hospital's duty. She had done her duty, the kind that isn't written in policies or bound by red tape, the kind you carry in your gut when someone's life is on the line. And for that, they called her reckless, dangerous, expendable. The morning didn't bring comfort. It brought routine, people moving on like nothing had happened. Dogs were walked, groceries unloaded, phones scrolled. But inside that small apartment on Maple Street, a nurse sat alone, stripped of everything she'd sacrificed for. And the man whose life she had saved, she didn't even know his name. Emily Hart sat in the silence, haunted by a question that would not leave her horizon. Was it worth it? The air outside was crisp, bright with the clean edge of early spring. She stepped onto her porch, the ceramic mug in her hands long gone cold. Her street, like many others in Houston, was just beginning to stir. Modest homes, cracked sidewalks, overgrown grass, but something felt off. At first, it was a low vibration, subtle, almost easy to dismiss. She frowned and placed her mug down, stepping further into the morning light. The sound grew louder, pulsing through her bones. And then she saw them. Two military helicopters burst over the rooftops, slicing through the quiet sky. Dark, ominous, powerful. Their rotors churned the air into chaos. Leaves spun violently. Dust rose in twisting spirals. They weren't just passing by. They were approaching fast now, slicing through the sky with precision. The roar of helicopter blades echoed down the street, and Emily could hardly breathe. The aircrafts descended straight toward her neighborhood, their shadows sweeping over rooftops. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, shielding their faces from the blast of wind stirred up by the rotors. An elderly man at the far end of the block clutched his robe closed, staring up in disbelief. A mother quickly ushered her children indoors, while others peeked anxiously from behind curtains, their faces painted with a blend of curiosity and fear. Emily's heart was a storm in her chest. Her thoughts raced. Was this really happening? Were they here because of her? For her? The helicopters settled into the vacant lot across the street, engines screaming until they finally whirred to stillness. Then, as if choreographed with perfect discipline, the doors opened in unison. Navy personnel stepped out in sharp, dark uniforms, their movements efficient and sure. At their center was a man whose presence quieted even the roar of engines, Commander Jacob Fields. He wasn't the figure Emily had expected. There was no chill in his demeanor, no sharp edge of authority meant to intimidate. The lines etched into his face told stories of experience, and beneath the steely discipline in his bearing, there was warmth, quiet, dignified warmth. A streak of gray threaded through his temple hair, and his eyes, alert and perceptive, scanned the gathering crowd until they found hers. The moment their eyes met, Emily felt something shift. There was no accusation there, no judgment, just calm, sincere gratitude. Commander Fields crossed the street with intention, each step steady and deliberate. His team followed closely behind, their silence deepening the gravity of the moment. The whole neighborhood had grown still, the kind of silence that hangs before something deeply important. Reaching her porch, Fields stopped and raised his hand in a solemn salute. "Emily Hart," he said, his voice carrying with unwavering clarity. "You saved one of ours, and the Navy does not forget its own." Emily was frozen, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and emotion. This moment didn't feel real, and yet every second of it burned into memory. Without a word, Fields stepped aside. One of the officers stepped forward and held out a small velvet box. Elegant, official, the kind used only for the highest recognitions. Fields' voice softened but carried no less weight. "This is the Navy's Medal for Civilian Valor," he said. "Fewer than 50 civilians in history have ever received it. It's awarded for acts of extraordinary courage when someone risks their life to save another." The officer opened the box, revealing the gleaming silver medal inside. An eagle, wings outstretched, above the engraved words, "For Civilian Valor." No cameras, no media circus, just the Navy showing up to say thank you in the most personal, meaningful way they knew how. Emily's hands trembled as she accepted the medal. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried not only the honor of the moment, but the entire weight of everything that had come before. The chaos of the trauma bay, the impossible decisions, the silent, personal cost. Around her, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rising in waves, clapping, cheers, even whistles ringing through the street. Neighbors stepped forward. Some simply nodded, their eyes full of quiet awe. Others clapped hard, openly, proudly. And yet, inside, Emily was still torn. On her kitchen counter sat the badge that had once defined her purpose. Her career, her calling, was gone. The Navy had honored her bravery, but the system she had served had abandoned her. The medal was a powerful gesture, but it didn't erase what had been lost. Commander Field seemed to read the storm behind her eyes. He stepped in just a bit closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Emily," he said gently, "I know this doesn't undo what was taken from you. But that man is alive because of you, a father, a son, a teammate. We couldn't let that go unsaid." For the first time in days, Emily felt tears rising, not from grief or exhaustion, but from the strange release that comes when you finally feel seen. Someone understood. Someone knew. The Navy officers offered one final salute. Fields extended his hand, firm and respectful. "You stood alone when it mattered," he told her. "That's what defines heroism." And just as swiftly as they had come, the team turned and returned to their helicopters. The engines spun to life again, the great machines lifting into the sky like birds returning to flight. The air stirred once more, and then they were gone, leaving only the sound of wind and the presence of something meaningful lingering in their wake. Emily remained on her porch, the medal cradled carefully in her hand. One by one, neighbors approached. Some offered handshakes, others just nodded, their eyes wide with admiration. In that moment, she stood between two realities, the pride of doing what was right and the pain of what it had taken to do it. As the last of the helicopters disappeared into the horizon, Emily Hart whispered quietly to herself, "Let this mean something." In the days that followed, the visit from the Navy felt like stepping into and out of someone else's dream. Nothing about her life was the same, and yet everything around her had gone on as if it were. The headlines spread quickly, slipping into news feeds and articles without her permission. "Fired nurse, honored by Navy." 6 blunt words splashed across screens and print like they could possibly explain the complicated, painful, and deeply personal story that belonged to Emily. But they didn't. They couldn't. She stayed away from the reporters, ignored the phone calls, let the interview requests pile up unanswered. The attention didn't matter. The awards, the recognition, the applause, none of that was what Emily sought. What mattered was healing. Real, quiet healing. Away from the noise, away from the spectacle. With quiet determination, she packed up the little apartment that had served as her haven, her space of solitude after everything fell apart. The Navy's commendation had come with more than a medal. It had come with a discreet offer of help, an opportunity to start fresh somewhere new. That's how she ended up behind the wheel, driving out of the city and toward the rolling hills where Ridgehaven Medical Center sat, humble, almost hidden, but promising something more precious than prestige. Peace. Ridgehaven wasn't anything like St. Raymond's. Gone were the glittering glass walls, the sterile, high-tech halls echoing with authority. In their place stood an older, weathered building, red brick warmed by time and seasons and storms. It didn't sparkle, but it felt solid, human. And as Emily stepped out of her car, a strange sensation bloomed in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt welcomed. At the front doors, a woman was waiting for her. Dr. Lorraine Shaw, the medical director, offered a firm handshake and a look that held no judgment, no questions, no curiosity wrapped in polite concern, just a simple greeting. "We're glad to have you, Emily," she said, sincere and straightforward. "Let's get to work." Inside, the hallways hummed with quiet purpose. Soft voices, steady steps, the rhythm of care delivered without fanfare. Nurses offered nods of acknowledgement as Emily passed. Some glances lingered with curiosity, but no one intruded. No one asked what had happened. They didn't need to. Emily's early days at Ridgehaven were spent gently reacquainting herself with the work that once brought her joy. She shadowed experienced nurses, observed, listened, stepped carefully into a rhythm that slowly began to feel familiar again. She checked vitals, comforted patients, responded to quiet emergencies. And little by little, the heavy shadow of St. Raymond's began to lift from her shoulders. At night, alone in her modest apartment, not far from the hospital, she'd sit by the window watching the stillness of the town, the softness of the stars. On a shelf sat the box with her Navy medal, untouched since the day it had been presented to her. She never took it out. The headlines, the applause, the public celebration, all of it had felt empty. Not compared to this. Not compared to the quiet thank yous whispered by families in worn-down waiting rooms. Not compared to the nods she received in the halls, the sense that her presence mattered, not because she was famous, but because she showed up. She found herself thinking more and more about what it meant to be a hero. Too often, the world measured heroism by its volume, by how loud the story was, how dramatic the gesture. But what about the quiet ones? The ones who showed up when no one was watching, who did what needed to be done simply because it was right. Those people kept the world turning. Those were the heroes Emily wanted to stand among. Not the ones who chased spotlights, but the ones who lit small candles in dark rooms. And maybe that was why she'd been led here, to this quiet place where she didn't have to justify her or wear her trauma like a badge. Here, no one wanted headlines. They just wanted her to do the work, to care. Nearly a month passed. The days had begun to feel normal again. That evening, the sun was sinking low, painting Ridgehaven's brick walls with golden light, when Dr. Shaw approached her in the hallway. Her expression was curious, her tone gentle. "Emily," as she said, "there's someone down in recovery who asked to see you. I thought you'd want to know." Heart quickening, Emily followed the winding, quiet corridors to the smaller recovery unit near the edge of the property. Ridgehaven had a partnership with the military's rehabilitation program, and this wing served soldiers and veterans on their way back from the brink. She stepped into the room, unsure of who she was about to see, unsure of what this moment would hold. And there he was, the Navy SEAL she had fought to save, the man whose life had been hanging by a thread in that operating room all those weeks ago. He looked different now, stronger, still healing. The scars remained, but there was clarity in his eyes and something else. Gratitude. Their eyes met. Neither spoke, not at first. The silence held everything that words could never capture. Grief, survival, relief, hope. Finally, he smiled, a small, weary smile that stretched just enough to soften the edges of his face. "They told me your name," he said. Emily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "And they told me yours," she replied softly. "Not all of it, though." He gave a half laugh, dry and self-aware. "That's probably for the best." There was humor there, still alive beneath the pain. He motioned to the chair beside his bed. Emily sat, folding her hands in her lap, unsure what to say next. "I don't remember much from that night," he admitted, voice quiet but sure. "But I remember a voice giving instructions, keeping everyone focused, keeping me here. That was you, wasn't it?" Emily hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. "It was a team effort," she said, "and no one saves a life alone." "Maybe," he murmured, "but not everyone would have tried." Emily had stepped up. She truly had. That day, she and the man whose life she'd saved talked quietly, not about medals or headlines or recognition, but about simple human things. The changing weather, the ups and downs of his rehab, and her new beginning at Ridgehaven. Before she left, he extended his hand and said only, "Thank you." There were no grand speeches or tearful tributes, just the sincere, grounded gratitude of one soul acknowledging another for a life-altering act. That evening, Emily walked home beneath a sky drenched in starlight. The breeze whispered through the pines, carrying with it the earthy scent of forest floor and fresh beginnings. She didn't crave applause anymore. The work itself was enough. The knowledge that she had chosen what was right and continued to live that choice every single day, that was what gave her peace now. As the soft, glowing lights of Ridgehaven sparkled in the distance behind her, Emily Hart finally felt a deep and lasting peace with the life path she had embraced. Days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. Slowly, Ridgehaven grew into more than just a job. It became Emily's home. The smaller hospital's gentle rhythm suited her. There were no reporters, no camera crews, no sensational headlines, just the deeply personal reward of doing meaningful work. Each day offered the quiet fulfillment of caring well, of reaching people in moments that mattered, even if the world never noticed. One cool autumn morning, as sunlight filtered in golden shafts through the tall pine trees ringing the hospital grounds, Emily crossed paths with Alyssa, a young nurse fresh out of nursing school. Her eyes were bright with enthusiasm, but her expression betrayed the quiet overwhelm of someone suddenly faced with the real weight of the job. In her, Emily saw a version of her younger self, armed with knowledge but still learning what it truly meant to show up when lives hung in the balance. Emily first noticed Alyssa during a chaotic shift. An elderly patient went into cardiac arrest without warning. The monitors screamed. Alarms pierced the air. Staff swarmed the room in controlled urgency. Alyssa froze, caught in the gravity of the moment. Her eyes darted, unsure. That's when Emily appeared by her side, calm, centered, steady. She took Alyssa's hands and guided her through chest compressions. She didn't yell or bark commands. She simply showed her how to lead with clarity, how to move with intention, how to let purpose override fear. Later, after the crisis had passed and they found a quiet moment in the break room, Alyssa turned to her and asked in a small, shaken voice, "How do you stay so calm?" I felt like I couldn't move. Emily smiled, a memory flickering behind her eyes, of her own trembling hands, of the invisible lines she once crossed between terror and action. "You'll move when it matters," she told her softly. "And sometimes when no one else will, that's when you find out who you really are." From that moment on, Alyssa gravitated toward Emily, not because she asked to be mentored, but because she instinctively knew she needed guidance. Emily didn't hesitate. She took her under her wing, not just teaching her the steps of medical protocol, but imparting the deeper, harder-earned lessons, the things no textbook ever says. She taught her how to sense when a team was starting to lose faith, how to listen to the quiet things people didn't say, how to lead not by raising her voice, but by anchoring the room with steady confidence. With every skill she passed on, Emily was transported back to that trauma bay, the one where she had stood alone, choosing action in the face of fear. She remembered the cost of that choice, but also the meaning it gave her life. As Emily settled into this new rhythm, her mind often wandered back to one question that had echoed in her since that night. What does heroism really look like? She had come to see that modern America was obsessed with loud, dramatic gestures, viral videos, news stories, flashy awards for single moments of bravery. And yet, through her experience, Emily had learned something deeper, something quieter. True heroism often happens in the spaces no one sees, between the headlines and the hashtags. It's the nurse who stays late to comfort a lonely patient, the paramedic who treats a struggling addict with dignity, the teacher who notices the child others have written off. Emily knew that the country admired the idea of heroism, the kind that made for great TV moments. But too often it failed to recognize or reward its quieter, more enduring forms. The kinds that required sacrifice without promise of recognition. The kinds that changed lives yet were too subtle to trend. She had come to understand another hard truth. The systems we build, healthcare, government, community, often end up failing the very people who act out of courage and conviction. These systems tend to reward compliance, not bravery. They protect themselves before they protect the individuals who risk everything for the good of others. Emily's own story wasn't unique. It had caught the public's attention briefly, but soon the spotlight moved on. What stayed with her was the knowledge that there were thousands more like her, unseen, uncelebrated, making courageous choices that changed lives and paying unseen prices for them. That, Emily thought, was the truth she hoped people would carry forward. Not that she was extraordinary, but that every community, everywhere, had its own quiet heroes. People who kept showing up, who kept doing what was right, even when no one noticed, and especially when no one clapped. Emily Hart had never believed she was anyone special, but sometimes the quietest people carry the deepest strength. One evening, while wandering the softly lit halls of Ridgehaven, Emily found herself hesitating outside the military recovery unit. Something pulled her there, an invisible thread of connection she couldn't explain. The door to one of the rooms stood slightly ajar, and without meaning to, she glanced inside. There he was, the man whose life she had fought to save. He sat by the window, his silhouette outlined by the dusky glow of twilight, eyes focused on the fading horizon. In that still moment, he turned. Their eyes locked. Emily. It was the first time she had ever heard him say her name. His voice, though no longer frail, carried the same depth of emotion it once did when he was clinging to life. It was fuller now, stronger, but in it was a quiet gratitude that cut straight through the silence between them. Emily stepped into the room and sat beside him. No words were needed. The weight of everything they'd both endured settled around them like a blanket, thick, unspoken, and profoundly shared. Finally, he broke the silence. "They told me what you did," he said, voice steady but raw. "I'm alive because of you." Emily's gaze dropped. "It wasn't just me," she whispered, almost apologetically, "but it began with you." His voice didn't waver. "You were the first, thank you." No spotlight, no audience, no grand declarations or patriotic music. Just two souls sitting in the quiet truth of what had passed between them. Two people changed by a moment the world would never see, but one they would carry forever. Emily Hart's story isn't simply about one nurse, one night, or even one courageous decision. It's more than that. Her story peels back the layers of what we think courage looks like and reveals something deeper, something quieter, something profoundly real. In today's America, we're quick to applaud the dramatic. We cheer for victories broadcast in high definition, for speeches and parades and medals. But what about the ones who walk in unnoticed, give without recognition, and leave with nothing but the knowledge that they did what needed to be done? What about the neighbor who silently checks in on the aging veteran down the street? The volunteer who returns every week to the shelter, knowing their face might be the only one someone sees that day? Or the nurse who, after a grueling double shift, stays late just to hold the hand of a frightened patient in the dark? What would this country look like if we lifted up these quiet acts of humanity the same way we celebrate the ones that make headlines? Emily's story is an invitation to look closer, not just at our communities, but at ourselves. Because maybe real courage isn't forged in fanfare, but in the unshakable will to do what's right when no one is watching. Maybe it lives in the soft moments, the unseen sacrifices, the choices made in silence. So now we turn to you. Who are the unseen heroes in your life? Have you ever watched someone step forward while the rest held back? Tell us. Share their story below so we can honor them together. And ask yourself, what does real courage look like in today's world? Do we, as a society, truly uplift those who dare to act with integrity? Or is there more we must do? Thank you for spending this time reflecting with us on Emily's journey. If her story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who believes, like we do, in the power of quiet heroism. Let's keep this conversation alive, because sometimes the voices that speak the softest leave the deepest echoes.